First-class passengers complained about wheelchair veteran on plane. Then both pilots collapsed. The co-pilot's voice shook as he made the announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Martinez. We have an emergency. Both pilots are incapacitated. I'm looking for anyone with flight experience. Military, commercial, private, anyone who can help fly this aircraft." Silence in the cabin. Then nervous whispers. Then full panic. Flight attendants moved through the aisles asking passengers directly, "Can anyone fly? Does anyone have pilot training?" They reached first class, where Jordan Blake sat in her wheelchair-accessible seat, the same seat that passengers had complained about, the same wheelchair that one man had called inappropriate for first class. The flight attendant recognized something in Jordan's expression. "Ma'am, do you have flight experience?" Jordan looked at the businessman who'd complained about her 30 minutes earlier. Then she looked at the flight attendant. "Yes, Air Force, F-16s, 217 combat missions. I can land this plane." The businessman's face went pale. "But you're in a wheelchair. I can't walk," Jordan said calmly, "but I can fly." For more powerful videos about our military heroes, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories. 1 hour earlier, Newark International Airport Captain Jordan Blake rolled her wheelchair through the boarding gate for Flight 447, a direct flight from Newark to London Heathrow. The Boeing 737 was scheduled to depart at 8:00 p.m., arriving in London at 8:00 a.m. local time, a 7-hour flight over the Atlantic Ocean. Jordan was traveling to London for a veterans conference where she'd been invited to speak about adaptive aviation programs. She'd paid for a first-class ticket, specifically because it offered wheelchair-accessible seating and more space to manage her mobility needs during the long flight. At 38 years old, Jordan had been paralyzed for 3 years, the result of an ejection seat malfunction during a training exercise. The explosive bolts that were supposed to propel her safely out of her damaged F-16 had fired unevenly, causing catastrophic spinal trauma. She'd survived, but her legs hadn't. Before the injury, Jordan had been one of the Air Force's most decorated pilots. Call sign Skywalker. 217 combat missions over Iraq and Afghanistan. Squadron commander, instructor pilot. She'd been on track to become a general. Now she was medically retired, her flying days officially over. The Air Force had determined that paralysis made her unable to meet the physical requirements for pilot status, despite her arguing that modern aircraft were flown primarily with hands and mental acuity, not legs. But Jordan hadn't stopped flying completely. She'd obtained a special private pilot certification for adaptive aircraft and had become an advocate for disabled pilots, working to change regulations and perceptions about what pilots with disabilities could accomplish. As she boarded the plane, Jordan noticed the looks. She always noticed them. Some passengers showed sympathy, others showed curiosity, a few showed discomfort, as if disability were contagious or inappropriate for public spaces. The flight attendant greeted her warmly. "Captain Blake, welcome aboard. You're in seat 2A, our wheelchair-accessible first-class seat. Let me help you get settled." Jordan transferred from her wheelchair to the specialized seat, which had been modified to accommodate passengers with mobility devices. The airline staff stored her wheelchair in the designated area. As Jordan settled in, buckling her seatbelt and arranging her belongings, she noticed the man in seat 2B staring at her with barely concealed annoyance. He was in his 50s, wearing an expensive suit, with the entitled air of someone accustomed to getting his way. His carry-on luggage was designer. His watch probably cost more than Jordan's entire wardrobe. "Excuse me," the man said to a passing flight attendant, his voice loud enough for multiple passengers to hear. "Is this correct? There's a wheelchair passenger in first class?" The flight attendant smiled politely. "Yes, sir. That's Captain Blake. She's in our wheelchair-accessible seat. But first class is supposed to be premium, comfortable. This," he gestured vaguely at Jordan, "this is going to be disruptive." What if there's an emergency? What if we need to evacuate? She'll slow everyone down. Jordan kept her expression neutral, though anger simmered beneath the surface. She'd dealt with this attitude before, but it never got easier. "Sir, Captain Blake has every right to be in first class," the flight attendant said firmly. "This seat is specifically designed for passengers with mobility devices." A woman across the aisle, late 40s, dripping with jewelry, chimed in. "I paid extra for first class specifically to avoid situations. This is supposed to be a premium experience." Another passenger, a younger man in business casual, added his voice. "I mean, no offense to her, but is it even safe? What if something happens?" Jordan finally spoke, her voice calm but carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded fighter squadrons. "Gentlemen, ma'am, I'm sitting right here. If you have concerns about my presence, you're welcome to address them directly to me, rather than talking about me like I'm not in the room." The businessman in 2B flushed slightly, but didn't back down. "Fine. I don't think it's appropriate for first class to have accessibility accommodations. There are other sections of the plane for that." "Other sections like the back?" Jordan asked. "Where people with disabilities should be hidden away so they don't make you uncomfortable." "I didn't say that. You implied it. And for your information, I paid the same price as you for this seat. I have the same right to be here. And the airline specifically offers this accommodation because disabled passengers deserve equal access to premium services." The flight attendant intervened. "Ladies and gentlemen, please. Captain Blake is a valued customer, and she's not going anywhere. If anyone is uncomfortable with the seating arrangements, we can discuss alternative options for you." The businessman muttered something under his breath, but dropped the subject. The other complaining passengers settled into their seats, shooting occasional disapproving glances at Jordan. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Jordan closed her eyes and took a slow breath. 3 years of living with paralysis, and people still acted like her wheelchair was a personal affront to their comfort. She thought about her Air Force career, about the respect she'd commanded as a pilot, about how her disability had somehow erased all of that in many people's eyes. But she'd learned to live with it, had learned to advocate for herself and others, had learned that changing minds was a long, exhausting process. She had no idea that in less than 2 hours, those same passengers who'd complained about her presence would be begging her to save their lives. 1 hour into the flight had been smooth so far. Jordan had ordered dinner, filet mignon, which first-class passengers were served on actual china, and was reading a book on her tablet when she noticed the first sign of trouble. The head flight attendant, a woman named Patricia, emerged from the cockpit looking concerned. She spoke quietly with another flight attendant, who immediately went to the galley. Jordan's military instincts kicked in. She'd spent enough time around aircraft and crew to recognize when something was wrong. A few minutes later, Patricia returned to the cockpit. Through the briefly opened door, Jordan caught a glimpse of movement, something that looked like one of the pilots leaning over. Then the cockpit door closed and the seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft chime. The captain's voice came over the speakers, but it sounded strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some minor turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." There was no turbulence. The flight was glass smooth. Jordan unbuckled slightly and leaned toward the aisle, catching Patricia's eye. The flight attendant looked stressed, almost panicked. Something was definitely wrong. 5 minutes later, Patricia emerged from the cockpit again, this time with genuine fear in her eyes. She conferred urgently with the other flight attendants, and Jordan saw them preparing medical supplies. Then came the announcement that would change everything. First Officer Martinez's voice, shaky and barely controlled. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Martinez. We have an emergency. Both pilots are incapacitated. I repeat, both pilots are incapacitated. I'm looking for anyone with flight experience, military, commercial, private pilot certification, anyone who can help fly this aircraft. Please identify yourself to a flight attendant immediately." The cabin erupted. Passengers screamed. A woman started crying hysterically. A man shouted, "We're all going to die. Parents grabbed their children. People pulled out phones to send final messages to loved ones. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with forced calm, asking passengers, "Can you fly? Do you have any pilot training? Any aviation experience?" Most passengers just stared in shock or shook their heads frantically. Jordan sat very still, her tactical mind already running calculations. Boeing 737. She'd never flown this specific aircraft, but she'd flown military transports during her career. The principles were similar, and more importantly, she understood aerodynamics, flight systems, navigation, and emergency procedures. The flight attendant reached first class. Patricia stopped at Jordan's seat, and their eyes met. "Ma'am," Patricia said, her voice desperate, "do you have flight experience?" The businessman in 2B was watching. So were the other passengers who'd complained about Jordan earlier, all of them looking terrified. Jordan met Patricia's eyes. "Yes, Air Force, fighter pilot, F-16s, 217 combat missions, squadron commander, instructor pilot. I can land this plane." Patricia's expression flooded with relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. "Oh, thank God, thank God. Can you come to the cockpit?" "But she's in a wheelchair," the businessman blurted out. "She can't fly. She can't even walk." Jordan turned to look at him. "I can't walk, but I can fly. Flying doesn't require legs. It requires hands, eyes, and mental clarity. I have all three." "This is insane," the jeweled woman across the aisle said. "We're going to die. She can't possibly—" "Ma'am," Jordan interrupted, her voice carrying the command authority of someone who'd led fighter squadrons. "Right now, I'm the only person on this aircraft with the training to land it. So you have two choices. Let me try, or accept that we're going into the Atlantic Ocean in approximately," she checked her watch, "47 minutes when we run out of fuel." The cabin went silent. Patricia made the decision. "Captain Blake, please come with me. We need you in the cockpit now." Jordan unbuckled and prepared to transfer. "I'll need help getting from my seat to my wheelchair, then from the wheelchair into the pilot's seat. My upper body strength is excellent, but the transfer will be faster with assistance." Two male flight attendants appeared immediately. They helped Jordan transfer into her wheelchair with practiced efficiency, then began wheeling her toward the cockpit. As they passed the businessman in 2B, Jordan heard him whisper to his seatmate, "We're all going to die. They're letting a cripple fly the plane." Jordan didn't respond. She didn't have time for his prejudice. She had 280 lives to save. In the cockpit. The scene in the cockpit was grim. The captain was slumped over the controls, unconscious. The first officer was barely conscious, fighting to stay alert, but clearly suffering from the same affliction. "Food poisoning," First Officer Martinez gasped. "The crew meal. Captain and I both ate it. Hit us about 20 minutes ago. I can't focus." Jordan assessed the situation with military efficiency. "How long before you lose consciousness completely?" "Minutes, maybe less." "Okay, get me into the captain's seat. Fast." The flight attendants and Martinez worked together to move the unconscious captain and help Jordan transfer into the pilot's seat. Her upper body strength, maintained through years of adaptive fitness training, allowed her to maneuver into position despite her paralyzed legs. Once seated, Jordan's hands went immediately to the controls. The muscle memory was still there. Her mind instantly cataloged the instruments, the flight data, the aircraft status. Boeing 737-800, cruising altitude 38,000 feet, current speed 450 knots, over the Atlantic Ocean approximately 1,200 miles from the nearest airport. Fuel status, 47 minutes remaining at current consumption. Jordan's hands moved across the controls with the confidence of someone who'd logged over 3,000 flight hours. Different aircraft, but the principles were universal. "First Officer Martinez, can you hear me?" Jordan asked. "Barely," he whispered. "I need you to stay conscious long enough to talk me through the 737 specific systems. Then you can pass out." "Understood." "Understood." For the next 3 minutes, Martinez walked Jordan through the critical differences between her F-16 experience and the Boeing 737, the flight management system, the auto throttle, the flap configurations, the approach speeds. Then Martinez lost consciousness, slumping in his seat. Jordan was alone. 280 lives depending on someone the passengers had wanted removed from first class 30 minutes ago. She toggled the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Jordan Blake. I'm an Air Force pilot, and I'm now flying this aircraft. I need everyone to remain calm and follow flight attendant instructions. We're going to land this plane safely. Her voice was steady, authoritative, commanding, the voice of someone who'd flown combat missions in hostile airspace. In the first-class cabin, passengers who'd complained about her wheelchair now listened to that voice like it was the word of God. The approach. Jordan radioed air traffic control. Boston Center, this is American Flight 447. Heavy emergency. Both pilots incapacitated. I'm an Air Force pilot, fighter experience, currently flying the aircraft. Requesting priority vectors to nearest suitable airport. The controller's voice came back professional but urgent. Flight 447, copy your emergency. Vector heading 2170, descend and maintain flight level 300. Nearest suitable airport is Boston Logan, 380 miles. Emergency services standing by. 447, roger, heading 270, descending to 300. Jordan's hands moved across the controls. Throttle back, slight nose down pitch. Watch the descent rate. Keep it smooth. The aircraft responded beautifully. These big commercial jets were designed to be stable, forgiving. Nothing like the twitchy, aggressive F-16s she'd flown in combat. She could do this. In the cabin, Patricia made announcements, keeping passengers updated. The terror had evolved into tense, desperate hope. People were praying, crying quietly, holding hands with strangers. The businessman in 2B sat rigid, gripping his armrests, watching the cockpit door like salvation might emerge from it. Jordan flew the approach with methodical precision, each step calculated, each adjustment measured. She was back in her element, the sky, where her paralysis meant nothing, where only skill and knowledge mattered. Boston Logan vectored her for a straight-in approach to runway 33L, the longest runway, the one with the most room for error. Flight 447, you're cleared to land runway 33L. Wind 310 at 12 knots. Emergency vehicles standing by. 447 cleared to land 33L. Jordan configured the aircraft for landing. Flaps extended, landing gear down, speed reducing, descent rate controlled. The approach was perfect. Years of flying muscle memory taking over. The runway appeared ahead, lit up in the darkness like a path to salvation. Jordan's hands stayed steady on the controls. Throttle back, nose up slightly. Flare, hold it, hold it. The main landing gear touched down with a gentle chirp of rubber on pavement. Jordan lowered the nose gear carefully, applied reverse thrust, applied brakes. The aircraft slowed, stopped. They were on the ground, safe. Jordan toggled the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Boston. The cabin erupted in applause, cheers, crying. Patricia burst into the cockpit and hugged Jordan, sobbing with relief. Aftermath on the ground. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft. Paramedics boarded immediately to treat the pilots and First Officer Martinez, who were rushed to the hospital. All would recover fully from the food poisoning. The passengers disembarked slowly, many stopping to look into the cockpit at the woman who'd saved their lives. The businessman from 2B approached Jordan as she waited for assistance, transferring back to her wheelchair. His face was streaked with tears. "Captain Blake," he said, his voice breaking, I need to apologize. I complained about you. I said you didn't belong in first class. I called you inappropriate. I said you'd be a safety hazard." Jordan looked at him calmly. "I remember. And then you saved my life. You saved all of us. You can't even walk, and you landed a plane that I couldn't even begin to understand how to fly." "I can't walk," Jordan agreed, "but I can fly. That's what I've been trying to tell people for 3 years. Disability doesn't mean inability. It just means doing things differently." The man broke down completely. "How can you even look at me? I was so cruel, so ignorant." "Because holding grudges doesn't change anything," Jordan said. "What changes things is moments like this, when people realize their prejudices were wrong, when they learn, when they grow." She paused. "Will you treat the next disabled person you meet differently? Will you question your assumptions about what people can or can't do?" "Yes," the man whispered. "God, yes, I'll never judge someone like that again." Other passengers approached. The jeweled woman who'd complained about premium experience, the younger businessmen who'd questioned safety, all of them apologizing, all of them transformed by the realization that the person they'd wanted removed had been the only person capable of saving them. Patricia helped Jordan transfer back into her wheelchair. "Captain Blake, the FAA wants to speak with you. The airline wants to give you a commendation. The media is requesting interviews." Jordan smiled tiredly. "Right now, I just want to call my family and let them know I'm okay." But as the news spread, as the story hit social media and news outlets, Captain Jordan Skywalker Blake became a symbol of something larger than one emergency landing. She became proof that disability didn't define capability, that prejudice was often based on ignorance rather than fact, that the person you underestimate might be the person who saves your life. 2 weeks later, Jordan was invited to speak at the FAA headquarters, not as a disabled veteran asking for accommodation, but as a hero being honored. The businessman from seat 2B attended. He'd tracked her down specifically to attend, bringing with him a donation check for $500,000 to Jordan's adaptive aviation program. "I want to fund scholarships," he said, "for disabled pilots who want to learn to fly, in honor of the woman who taught me that my prejudices almost cost me my life." Jordan accepted the donation with grace. "Thank you. This will change lives." She addressed the FAA, arguing for expanded opportunities for pilots with disabilities, the regulations that had forced her into medical retirement despite her clear competence. "Flight 447 proved something that should have been obvious," Jordan said. "Flying is a mental skill enhanced by physical controls. It requires judgment, spatial awareness, systems knowledge, and decision-making under pressure. None of those things require working legs. I flew 217 combat missions for this country. I commanded a fighter squadron. I trained dozens of pilots. And then an injury that didn't affect my hands, my eyes, or my mind ended my career. Not because I couldn't fly, as Flight 447 proved, but because regulations assumed I couldn't. It's time to change those assumptions. It's time to evaluate pilots based on what they can do, not on outdated assumptions about what they can't do." The FAA listened. Within 6 months, they would begin revising pilot medical certification standards, creating pathways for pilots with certain disabilities to return to cockpits if they could demonstrate competency. Jordan's emergency landing had done more than save 280 lives. It had changed an entire industry's perspective on disability and capability. 1 year later, Jordan stood, with the help of advanced prosthetic leg braces, at a podium in front of the graduating class of the Air Force Academy. She'd been invited as commencement speaker. "Future officers," she began, "I want to tell you about the most important flight of my career. It wasn't a combat mission. It wasn't a training sortie. It was the day I landed a commercial airliner I'd never flown before with 280 passengers, after both pilots became incapacitated. And I did it from a wheelchair, because I can't walk, but I can fly." She paused, looking at the young faces before her. "Some of you will face injuries, setbacks, challenges that seem insurmountable. The military will tell you that certain conditions disqualify you from certain roles. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's just assumption, just outdated thinking, just fear of the different. Your job, your duty, is to prove what you can do, not to accept what others assume you can't do, to fight for the opportunity to serve in whatever capacity your skills allow, to change minds and change systems. I was told I could never fly again. That paralysis made me unfit for pilot status. 3 years later, I landed a 737 that even fully able-bodied passengers couldn't have landed. Because flying isn't about legs. It's about skill, knowledge, courage, and the refusal to accept limitations that aren't real. The graduating class gave her a standing ovation, and Jordan knew that at least some of them would remember her words when they faced their own challenges, their own disabilities, their own moments of being told they couldn't. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated because of something beyond your control? Have you ever judged someone's capabilities based on their appearance? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that disability doesn't mean inability, that the person you underestimate might be the person who saves your life, and that prejudice is often just ignorance waiting to be corrected, hit that subscribe button, because every person deserves to be judged by their capabilities. Every hero deserves recognition, and sometimes the person others want to hide away is the only person who can save everyone.